These guys organized this bigger than life event, almost like an IFA award. Okay. It was so successful to a point where the government notices UPI transactions available on the app. Next day, 24 hours straight, crypto industry close India.
Hi Prashant, good to see you again after many years. It's just like 3 days feels that long. But today's guest is damn special, and he's a self-proclaimed metaverse expert.
Sir, when someone tells you they are a metaverse expert is when you run the other side.
No. I have a theme music for that title. God. Shall I play it?
வேணான்னு சொன்னா ப்ளே பண்ணாம இருக்க புரியா ப்ளீஸ்.
இதெல்லாம் தமிழ்ல பண்ண போறோமா நம்ம?
Oh, that is amazing. Okay, we have the third one who's Tamil as well. This is incredible.
Tamilian from Hyderabad, so may not be as good, but yeah, we'll get by.
I'm பரவாயில்ல சார், ரஜினிகாந்த் மாதிரி பேசிக்கலாம்.
Were you able to hear that music? I was playing the Karagattakaran background theme after saying metaverse.
நீ அந்த உலகத்துல ப்ளே பண்ணிட்டு இருக்கேப்பா, இங்க ஒண்ணும் கேட்கல.
Hey, it's playing off the speakers, right?
Not interoperable, bro. Just yet.
So this is fun, right? So I first met Sai. I think I'd heard of you as the crazy giga chat designer who is building some cool things for Polygon. And then when I met him at a party in Bangalore after the Coinbase event, I think we were like, "Hey, you speak Tamil?" Huh? I was like, "Yeah, man, I speak Tamil." It felt like a breath of fresh air when we started chatting, because I feel like generally I haven't met those many Tamil people over here. But after talking to him, we were like, "Oh, this guy is also Tamil. That guy is also Tamil." So nice South Indian bonding we had. But since then, met him several times where we had pretty deep conversations about what is happening in Web3 and metaverses and so on. So this will be a sneak peek into one of those conversations with Sai. Thank you so much. You are now an honorary normie. Welcome.
Thanks for. No, honestly, thank you so much for having me in, guys. The interesting part is the Coinbase story that you mentioned for a second. நீங்க நோட்டீஸ் பண்ணீங்களா, there is a tangential story that's playing in the bottom of it. These guys organized this bigger than life event, almost like an IFA award. Okay. It was so successful to a point where the government notices UPI transactions available on the app. Next day, 24 hours straight, crypto industry close India. இவனால லைக் ஸ்ட்ரீட் இழுத்து முடியாச்சு. லைக் அதுக்கு அன்னிலேருந்து யூபிஐங்கிற வார்த்தையே ஒரு எக்ஸ்சேஞ்சுக்கு வந்தது கிடையாது. So congratulations on successfully nuking like every hope that an exchange had in India. அன்னிலேருந்து ஆரம்பிச்ச வேணாம் நம்ம கண்ட்ரிக்கு என்ன முடியல. நான் ஊர் விட்டு ஊரே வந்துட்டேன் அதனால.
So basically what Sai is saying, for the audience that does not understand Tamil, although I pity the guys who don't understand Tamil, because the way he said it was so beautiful that it would have sounded 10x better. So essentially, after the Coinbase event, when they had launched UPI transactions in India, they had the government took notice of that and shut down all bank relationships for all exchanges. This was not our
the
event.
reason why they took notice was the Builders Tribe event. There was such a big deal in terms of word of mouth that eventually it just reached out and people were like, something's off here. And then every exchange had UPI nuked out. So congratulations.
No, that is not what happened. We were doing the pitch competition inside the Coinbase event. We did not do the Coinbase event. That was all them.
But there's a lot of nuking happening in between us right here now.
Sai does this a lot. So coming back to what Sai is a great expert at, which is metaverses, we are going to kind of dive into we're going to dive into just kind of understanding where all this came from, what sense to make of it. But a good place to start would be the project that you contributed to, Sai. Because I feel like when you kind of understand the building blocks of this metaverse, a website essentially that has kind of spatial depth to it. The technology that you contributed to and worked on is such a pivotal role, at least in a Web3 context. So if you can share a little bit about that, it'll be quite nice.
Hey, just also one thing, na, Sai, if you could just give a bit of your background as well, because when we also met, na, your background is so relevant to what we are discussing here, and a lot of the Web3 founders we see in Metaverse are just, woken up to Metaverse today and have been doing something entirely different in the past, right? And they just think they can crack it. So your, I think, background is also very relevant. So if you can go through that, that'll be great.
For sure. In fact, I think that's perhaps necessitated purely because I approach the world, as I say, from a triangle, not from a token, right? Unlike most of the Web3 founders who understand that part of the world significantly better, my understanding of the entire world started with what a triangle is. What do I mean by that? For the ones, my name is Sai. I'm sort of what your textbook would call as an accidental entrepreneur. Like my journey started as a series of chumma try panni paakalame. It's like basically a way of saying there's no love lost in giving it a shot. And that's really where it got up and running with. My first startup was back in college because unlike Raghu, I didn't study all too much, which effectively meant that I had to cut classes, bunk, and figure a way out in between. So started building an education startup back then, exited that. We used to do white labeled learning management systems. Like even today, an LMS is so bad in India that it's still an opportunity apparently like 9 years in. But we exited that to an Axel funded company. Then subsequently went on to build a hyperlocal delivery startup that sort of fizzled. Then studied at Stanford for a little while, got back and tried to build my next. And now here's the problem, right? Like we're all trying to build our next startup, and what business school teaches you is you know nothing about building a good business, right? So at least that part, I started with a lot more humility this time around than before. And what I did want to do was look at where computing would go in for 5-7 years. Like if this is successful, which is itself like a big miracle, you're going to be doing it for 5 to 7 years, base case, right? So your best case here is boring Prashant out to exit the call itself. But your second best case is to go through that process. Should we keep at it? Yeah.
Yeah, just keep at it. Don't worry.
Sorry, man. Power off.
No stress, Chief. So that's when I started a startup called Scapic, which was in the virtual and the augmented reality space. This was back in 2017, right? So when crypto founders say that building in the winter is tough, sir, we've seen like the North Pole or like nuclear aberration in terms of nobody bothering about the space, which was what virtual reality was back in 2017. The hope was over a period of time, your smartphone and everything that we do to record a concert or do stuff like this is going to go here to your glasses. When that happens, you're actually now changing an interface, right? And interface changes are the biggest billion-dollar opportunities that you would find in like the arc of computing itself. Like whenever interfaces have changed, like a whole new category of businesses is possible. Like simple examples being your Ubers and Airbnbs, right? The successes that they had in the early part of the decade previously was because there was an iPhone around, right? Mm-hmm. Like the iPhone was single-handedly responsible for more unicorn formation than we like to credit it, right? Because the interface had changed out. Similarly, like the whole concept of smaller groups in social media, the way that that's going on, that has always existed on the desktop web, right? Only now is it making a resurgence again because there is an interface change, which meant that if these interfaces change, and VR and AR is called the ultimate interface, and we'll come to that in some time, but that means that it creates more opportunity than most other markets around us back then, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why I started building in virtual and augmented reality when nobody was like blinking an eye back then. Between 2017 and 2020, we built it. We put a no-code editor. What does that mean? Think of Webflow meets like virtual reality, and you have the easiest way of building and launching a VR or an AR experience and throwing it out there. So put that out and eventually realize that there is one industry that seems to like using this, which is e-commerce. Why does e-commerce like using this? Money, right? Like you can make more money engaging with the product, retaining a customer or converting a customer. So suddenly I had a business model when I was searching for one, right? Like it was again a little accidental. So then we doubled down on e-commerce. like continued building there. 50 odd customers, a couple of rounds of capital, and then I receive a ping from the folks at Flipkart saying the customers of the product, it's been pretty good, but we want to do this like a lot more. This was midway through the pandemic, by the way. So suddenly everything which was remote or which was like available through your smartphone is a miracle and then some, since sliced bread. And augmented reality fit that really well. So now the company wanted to build that capability like in greater depth. So then Scapic was acquired by Flipkart, like probably one of the few AR/VR acquisitions to go around. And post which we then kickstarted a few initiatives there: Flipkart Camera, Flipkart Labs, Firedrops, Flipverse, and a few of these. The Flipkart Camera initiative specifically was how does the camera become a surface for shopping? Right, like we always seeing is buying, right? As much as seeing is believing. So how do you now like move that forward through the camera and make that a commerce surface? And we struck a big partnership with Snapchat to see where that moves, and that has been the hope so far. So if our goal is to really get not onboard billions onto crypto, like andalavukku lofty lang kediyadu, but a little less lofty in terms of finding ways in order to make the camera more fired up for commerce. That's really where my work at Flipkart was pushing the boundaries on.
Nice. How did Polygon happen?
Oh man. So in between everything, I started actively wanting to go back and build or be a part of early stage startup journeys, right? So set up a startup studio that was called Cope. And the studio's job was to either build an idea that we were passionate about, or fund an idea that we could help in a meaningful way, which means fund an idea just in the metaverse, right? Like that's the only space we understood, right? We were one trick ponies by a huge margin. So the one trick ponies then started deploying some capital, like about 80K per startup into a few outcomes to see where they come about. Five things that we had tried back then, two of which went on to like generate a decent amount of activity on chain, which is when I had an intro to JD and Sandeep, and we started riffing between the three of us in detail. And one of the things that I noticed was crypto UX is admirably broken, right? Like it almost takes effort to be this stuff, right? So that's when we realized, okay, that's a space that we can certainly have some impact on. And the second being the metaverse narrative is increasingly getting intermingled with what crypto is. A triangle and a token are blurrier than ever. இந்த பக்கம் வர்ச்சுவல் லேண்டுங்கிறான், அந்த பக்கம் அவட்டாருங்கிறான், அவட்டார் மேல ஸ்கின்னுங்கிறான், எல்லாம் சேர்த்து போட்டு NFTங்கிறான் இஷ்டத்துக்கு. So what we realized is, boss, I don't want to miss this boat as much. And I know we know stuff that the others in the boat might not, right? They understand their tokenomics, they understand their supply demand pieces, but nobody gets a game engineer, right? So we can certainly help there. And that's really why this felt very complementary, right? In terms of what we could bring to the table, learn more importantly from the others around us in a space that had done way better at managing its activity or its buzz. Why? Because it's a speculative instrument, right? Like there is a concept of money that's attached to the space, which brings in the kind of activity, hype, buzz, and the ability for the space to go through multiple ebbs and troughs, surviving, which is why crypto has survived as long as it has, right? So it and that in itself, that resilience is very difficult to bring to other spaces. Like for example, self-driving, right? Like, or asteroid mining. We've seen industries that have had the same amount of hype when they got started, but fizzle out over a period of time because they don't have the ability to keep the beat up with like an instrument of financialization, right? And that's really where crypto thrives, while other industries like go through a trough and it's very difficult in order to get back from it. So that's where we thought, boss, we should learn from this. Let's sort of go about it. And since then, Cope was sort of gobbled up by Polygon, and most of the work tends to go into the ecosystem, either furthering the protocol or like very useful projects on the protocol.
Gobbled up by Polygon, it seems. That was also an acquisition. All nice people are acquiring your talents by the looks of it.
We luck out now.
It's really good to have you on here, man. So, you know, as a triangle builder, as opposed to more of a token builder, where do you see the two meet Does, a metaverse, should a metaverse necessarily be open? And should that open metaverse be financialized using fungible tokens or non-fungible tokens, the way they are being done right now? Like, I'll get straight to the point, right? Like, idu thevaya? Is this necessary? and
Mudalvan interview Mari, he's already pulling no punches, boss. My word.
No, but tell me,
very relevant.
I tell you that I'm closely associated with a project that is building a metaverse for a very specific use case as well. And we always struggle to ask ourselves, okay, why? What are you decentralizing? Why do you need a token?
Correct,
correct, so you have to. I want to hear your perspective of this, because you've been a builder first, and then you kind of got into the crypto rabbit hole. And where do you see the two meet? Do they even meet? And is this necessary?
Lots to unpack there. First part is what state of the union, right? In terms of where and in what ways are we seeing projects around us? A lot of what we see around us is not a metaverse, right? Let's start there. It's a virtual world. Just because something exists inside a 3D space does not make it a metaverse, right?
So
there is a metaverse. Like, it's a virtual world, right? What every project is doing today is creating siloed, independent 3D spaces that have some characteristic ability to do something whatsoever. Like a bank having a 3D way to go operate an ATM does not make the bank's metaverse happen, right? Please. Okay. Like a shoe company that does a product launch which is going to give you a 10% off on a limited edition shoes, a great activation. That's a virtual world at best. And a metaverse is definitely like an exaggeration, right? So let's look at what a metaverse should be for a second, which is it's like a web. It's like what the web would be in terms of multiple URLs that are connected to each other, rendered through a web browser that works seamlessly. Like when we hopped on to Google Meet right now, or when Raghu's on WhatsApp while we are talking, or on the third side, or on the third side when we are on YouTube, all of this works well inside a web browser. Links render because of a rendering engine, which is called Chrome and Chromium, which is built in. It just works, right? Like, websites are linked together, stuff loads on your browser, your life's peaceful. A metaverse is nowhere close to this today, right? We don't, but it should be, right? For us to even call something a metaverse, you should have multiple URLs or multiple parts of this world building that is linked together. You can traverse between these worlds. Each world can do something more uniquely different than the other, which is a communications platform is different from an entertainment platform, is different from a commerce platform. And you have a reason to exist in these virtual spaces, just like the way you have a reason to exist on a website. Interoperability is the very foundations of what should be here. But today, the standards body, the standards or the projects that are building disregard these standards entirely, right? Which effectively means we're building a 3JS, WebGL or Unity project and now calling these metaverses. They're not. They never will be, right? So step one is we either recalibrate, right? Which is ask for all these projects to work on a common set of standards, which is USB-C the metaverse. We just have to force it in. Or you allow the noise to die out, which I think 23 will be particularly useful for, which is spaces that have dwindling activity will not have free money to just keep staying alive. And then the third is you wait for a seminal moment, which is someone has to come in and just tell you guys, this is how it's done. Otherwise, like, you can't be part of my ecosystem, which is typically like a Meta or an Apple with a successful launch, which is if the Oculus is successful, like a tearaway success, then Meta can come in and say, for you to do anything inside Horizon, which is their metaverse platform, this is exactly how you go about it. It's like Instagram, right? Instagram sets the rules for how commerce, stories, augmented reality, like anything happens inside the platform. A platform has to be so successful that they dictate the rules. Your standards body have to force this better, or you just need to let the bad projects die out, right? Like these are the only three options we have to reset what's going on right now. But today, we are criticizing the metaverse because we have never done a decent definition of what the metaverse should be, because projects have conveniently been exaggerating way beyond what they should in terms of what their virtual worlds or a 3JS scene, which has been downloaded most likely from CodePen, is doing out there.
You should tell your 3JS connection as well, no?
Oh, man.
Because just for the audience, man is getting riled up about 3JS because of a very specific reason, which he will tell you right now.
So we've seen this happen a few times, right? Like the passion comes from Ricardo, this guy who goes by the pseudonym Mr. Doodh, and I were very closely involved in getting the early stages of what 3JS was up and running, right? He was the advisor to Scapic back in the day when we all built something called WebXR, which is Web Extended Reality, an API that's built into Chrome today, which you can use in order to fire up VR and AR experiences and get that going, right? It took us 2.5 years to build. I basically built the entire company and sold it by the time WebXR was out there into the wild, right? Like standards bodies are slow, they are painful. And in between this, we also built and contributed a lot to something called A-Frame. A-Frame is basically like iframes are there for your existing websites. A-Frame is what you would have on your VR websites, like declarative HTML type website building, but for 3D websites and stuff like that. To this day, and it's also painful that to this day, A-Frame is the most used library for like 3D website building on top of 3JS or WebGL and stuff like that. It shouldn't be. Right? I would rather wish for a world where it's such archaic technology that you look back at it and you're like, were we using this nonsense to build stuff? But it's not. It today continues to be the most forked library in order for you to get started building a VR site or like a 3D site.
Decentraland uses A-Frame pretty deeply.
Decentraland continues to use it. Their land builder, their existing rendering, all of it is still heavily A-Frame based, which is both a good and a bad thing, more bad than good, because the industry has to move way farther than that. Like, and that's really why the quality of the VR experiences you've seen, the engagement that comes with it, and the reason to stay in there is all low, right? They are not giving you enough reasons to be around because the quality is bad and the engagement is going to be trash. But all of that's happening because we are using 5-year-old tech in order to possibly be building this when we really don't need to, right? So which is why other side, which is like the Yuga Labs 3D world, looks significantly better because they made a very conscious choice to skip all of this and sort of build it out with very new technology, and that which means that it can be done, right? Like there's no reason to believe that your space needs to look low poly, low fidelity, and low engagement, because clearly on the other side it can be pulled off, and it can be pulled off at very reasonable costs. So startups now have lesser reasons to say that here is a quasi experience that we will eventually build out in 2 years into our roadmap or something like
that. Love it.
Yeah, brilliant, right? Also, just going back to the way you kind of distilled how a metaverse can eventually come to an existence, right? Which is agreeing on a common set of standards, right? Letting a lot of hype and noise die out, and then waiting for a seminal moment, right? Like what iPhone was for the previous generation, right? In a way. It kind of feels like this is a lot more towards a closed kind of a metaverse, right? And the reason I say that is, how do you otherwise agree on a common set of standards in something like Web3, right? Yuga Labs has built something today. How do you get like other people to kind of adopt what they have built and like something that becomes more interoperable, right? And then you have multiple chains as well, and interoperability standards, etc. is a nightmare, right? I mean, both from a computational standpoint and a physics standpoint, it feels like it's something that cannot be achieved, right? may not be achieved, right? So how do you see this transition happening? Like, is it like we start from a Web2 kind of a metaverse and go into Web3? Or, is there a way that standards can be agreed? And like, if you guys have had this discussion within Polygon as well, right? Like, would love to understand how do you kind of see this three kind of pillars falling into a Web3 context?
Basically, what he's asking is, idu thevaya?
Which is true, and the answer is 100% yes. Like idu thevayangiradhukku, there is a point where this tech is getting smaller, better, and good enough to a point where I am increasingly wearing a headset nearly daily and doing something. Right? Like, and this something is not just gaming at this point. The more it goes away from gaming into a general purpose computing platform, and the more you do it every day, that's like, holy smokes, it's awesome. which is I'm using today the Quest Pro to do that. The problem is that device is $1,500, but that's okay, right? Like devices should get better before they get cheaper in a getella, right? Like think of a Range Rover, right? Like or a Cadillac. You like to see an expensive car, you want to get it. The desire is a better place to be in than making a $200 headset that's like garbage, right? Like so, I would think that today, even if a headset is $3,000, we should set that first in terms of this is what's possible with the piece of technology that we have. Second part. In terms of will it ever happen to be like the web? இது வந்து Web3 மாதிரி சொல்லணும்னா wrong incentive alignment அப்படின்னா, which is Web3 is to blame on this part, which is today to build out standards or standardize a lot of how the metaverse is built. You need to do a lot of heavy lift, right? Like you need to set what standards are, evangelize these standards to be used by people, and then hopefully there is a critical mass to getting it going. When you're doing that heavy a lift, why would you do it for a not for profit motive, right? And the moment it's a profit motive, you're either thinking of being a new protocol or you're thinking of privatizing what you're building in order to make it a software that people pay for, right? So the profit motive inherently is tied to the amount of effort that's coming in from here, and the value capture to that is either only at an L1 level or completely at a closed ecosystem. There's no in between right now, right? Which is why you are at a point where it's completely closed, Yuga Labs, or it's completely L1 based, like Lamina. Lamina is like this new chain that's out there specifically for the metaverse and stuff like that. Now, what's the in between, right? And again, I think that's like needed experimentation this year. How do I derive value in the EVM ecosystem while helping everyone have the same set of standards, or at least nudging people there, which means the standard has to be 10x better than what is today to make existing projects feel tempted to come. The standards has to make everyone money in some way or the other and not just be like Ponzi-nomic in nature. And the third is this has to work well inside the EVM ecosystem, which is点typically where a lot of the activity for like 3D and metaverse projects can be found at. Now, that hasn't been cracked, right? The more you look at it, the more it becomes a closed source answer or a let's launch another L1 answer, which is, I think, where things are as chaotic as it is.
My sense is that just to kind of add to that, Prash, Web3 does have a standard, but that, for example, at least with token generation, there are only a handful of projects that are not ERC20, right? Like I feel like so long as within an ecosystem there is a solution that's really that good, then the community essentially unanimously votes to making that the standard. But given how fragmented our space is, I don't think that time is anytime. But it'll happen. Like I just feel like because it's so hyper free market, everybody gets to do what they think is right. Everybody can community around it as well. And eventually what will happen is some will die out, some will stay, and everybody kind of gets to that.
People just gravitate towards whoever is like, has evolved to an extent where they have survived the rest, right? And have ample resources that they can then use maybe through brute force to establish these standards, even in like a Web3 context, right? Maybe that's where we eventually end up in that context. Yeah.
And there is a lot of reasons to be optimistic about some dark horses here. For example, Epic now has a new programming language just for the metaverse. It's called Verse. Right. And so stuff like that is what I would call as soft seminal movements, which is like you don't even realize it's really important before like you quickly get to a point where everyone's using it. Like Vercel and Next.js, right? Like when these two had launched back in the days, you never really made a big deal of it. Everyone was a React guy, like taking a dunk on Angular. That's all right. Like the world was still polarized there. But very quickly you realize that Vercel's great. Like I can easily deploy using this as compared to any other piece of like web frameworks in the past. Now the same with like Framer versus Webflow, right? Like these are website design tools, and there's a new website design tool that comes by which is significantly easier. Before you know it, everyone's like rushing to that in order to get it good. Similarly, a programming language, like if done well, and if it is not too difficult to pick up, can be one of those moments where everyone rushes in order to rewrite everything into it or write some incredibly useful new applications on it, when the distribution is also controlled by the programming language. What do I mean by that is Apple can force Swift down your throat and you can't do anything about it because the App Store is basically the be all end all of your pockets, right? So even if Swift is less or more complex, you will live with it. Similarly, there is a world where Epic would say Verse is the only way that you'd be able to build and deploy virtual worlds moving forward. I will connect all the virtual worlds into being a metaverse. That's huge, right? Now, this is me reading into the tea leaves, but all I'm saying is there is reasons to be incredibly optimistic about the way some of the companies are approaching this in terms of solving for it without asking the companies to solve for it. Right, like asking every individual project to make the migration stuff. Let me just use this as a forcing function in order to get everyone in, and I'll then tie all of this together. Is probably one more way to go about getting it to a better place.
Yeah, interesting. You brought up Epic as well, right? From like the entire Web2 context. I mean, Epic is very interesting. It has like an engine of its own, a game store of its own. It's got, Fortnite as a mega game up there. Tim Sweeney seems to be like someone who is very I don't know, passionate, but like believes in Web3 as a ethos. So it's actually something that is super interesting. Sorry, Ravi, you were saying something.
Yeah, I mean, I think one part of the question Arman is not answering correctly, which is the Web3 Metaverse intersection. Metaverse, I can get that it is a order of magnitude, a greater way of consuming content, interacting with it in a never before thought way. For those who don't believe, please, if you can get your hands on like the cheapest Oculus, watch Netflix in that. That is, I think, the best.
Really good.
Dude, like that's the best endorsement for a Oculus. It's unreal. Go do it, and then you'll realize what this is about. Or play Beat Saber. That is also quite nice. So, but the Web3 Metaverse conversation is still something that outside of say Decentraland and maybe Yuga Labs, I don't know if Yuga Labs would have had that kind of success if not for apes that came before it. So the question is, where does this intersection happen? And again, back to it, Iditeveya. I think we should call this episode Iditeveya.
I love it. I love it actually.
It's very nice. So moon it up. And if you ask me, identity, items, and environment. Right? Like let's sort of quickly just look at these and say where Web3 uniquely does something which you cannot achieve otherwise, right? Like Web3 liyum panna mudiyungiradhu onne, Web3 la mattum dhaan panna mudiyungiradhu. I would rather focus on the second part. So the first, like when I talk about environments, I'm talking about say Unreal Engine, right? Like these environments go on for like terabytes in size at times if you wanted to, right? Like there are some games where the rich environments are like nearly terabytes and then they compress it to be a 50 GB 60 GB game like Cyberpunk and then give it to you to play. But that's one game, right? If you're talking about the metaverse as a whole, like all websites, all links and all worlds put together, this is going to run into like a data problem pretty quickly and a GPU problem on top of the data problem, right? Like who's going to render these worlds out for you? There is no way that you will have a centralized company rendering these worlds out, right? Like at some point, the horsepower needed to make the metaverse happen will have to get into every laptop, cell phone, or a computing puck that you would have with you more often than not. Anywhere there is a GPU, there will be something done in order to render a world either for you or for someone else. What do I mean for someone else is remote rendering is increasingly being popular, which is the Google Stadia approach of some other GPU renders it and then streams it to your device. So that's very much a thing as well. There's very much a part of this metaverse narrative, which would be the highest quality experiences will require distributed rendering, which can be done in a better way and in an token incentivized model only inside a Web3 ecosystem, which effectively means that how do you monetize idle GPU time, right? Which is like bread and butter important for the metaverse as we move forward, will come from only a Web3 sort of model where it actually really ties this well together, which Web2 platforms simply can't bring to the table. That's one. The other two is identity and items. On identity, it is simple. Today, you have a way to sign into multiple websites, but cookies are what translate context from one website to the other. for good and bad purposes. Everyone thinks cookies are bad, sure, but cookies are very important in terms of translating preferential context across sites as well. They do some useful things too. So the cookie equivalent in the metaverse can be done better, correctly with Web3, which is your identity stays with you as you go from one virtual world to the other. This can be visual, this can be preferential, this can be programmatic. Visual identity, no, avatar. Preferential identity. Now, how do I like to see the world that is rendered to me? Do I have favorite colors? Do I have a stylistic way of rendering these worlds? Do I attest to some people who are blocked inside these 3D spaces who I simply do not wish to interact with? There is a lot of that comes into the preferential piece. The last part to this would be more to do with what can I do at a programmatic level, either for the ads that are served to me or the things which I like to see. These are programmatic. Now, the programmatic layer is now can be made for profit, a massive ad engine. The preferential layer can be made as a personalization engine. The visual identity layer is truly what makes you you. Again, when you have to tie all three together, do it in an elegant manner and let you, the user, keep access to most, if not all of this, Web3 is the only answer all over again. Right? So here too, it becomes a useful thing which Web2 simply can't. Web2 will again concentrate that power into one company. It's only the half-life of corruption there is only, it's a matter of when, not if. Right? If you give that sort of access control to what like a Web2 entity can have. The third is items. Items are actually done very well in Web2 today, which is game items. We've all fought with our friends, gone to some random part of World of Warcraft in order to exchange a game item or the other. Game items have always had an intrinsic economy that's built into them, right? We've always seen this happen in Web2. The problem is in Web2, it's only inside that game, right? Hey boss, you've given me a sword, I've given you a hammer. This is all that we need to do here and move it forward. In Web3, two things should happen, which is this should not be inside a game. There's no concept of a game. Games can be in the metaverse, but the metaverse itself is more than just a game, which effectively means how do you now make these items useful across multiple contexts? What does a sword do inside a video call? Or what does a sword do inside a Netflix watch party that you're having in the metaverse? We don't know. Right, but we need to make that permissionless, which is allow for anyone to declaratively add properties to an item to make it more useful in the longer scheme of things outside gaming experiences. The second is find ways in order to transfer, exchange, and hold on to these items with a thriving economy to it, because the metaverse again is propped up by reasons to exist there. You just like the way Instagram is propped up with dance videos because people make terrible ad money from it, is the reason why that whole category blew up, right? So similarly, Web3 and the concept of in-game or inverse items make it really useful for you to build an economy around this, keep the activity of it incredibly high, and give people a reason to design good experiences, items for those experiences, and put in the effort that is needed for the quality of these metaverse experiences to increase. Which is really why I would put it as environment, identity, and items as three things that you can't do in Web2 today nearly as effectively or as well as what Web3 can bring to the table.
Very compelling reasons, man. It's just that interoperability of assets is something that I've heard every game developer unanimously tell me is impossible to do.
It is impossible to do.
Which is why standards, right?
Sorry, standards, Leo. What would you for example? Let's say you're Amazon, right? Someone has come in from let's use a game. Someone has come in from Minecraft with a torch. What do I give that torch any property or use inside an e-commerce use case? Right? So I think what will happen is you need to have a least common denominator of just doing something with it in this and that itself today is impossible to do because of the number of items that can be done. A potion is an item, a spell is an item. Any game can declaratively put anything as item 1, item 2 to item n. And now interoperable or these cross-pollinated standards just take the complexity to infinity very quickly. By pure deductive math, the complexity goes to infinite super easily. So what items will end up becoming is either pure visual outside that game. Items lose their use and just become visual artifacts outside, or we have to have a least common denominator, which is you can address your avatar with badges of the items or whatever. We need to give something for the items to make this interoperability narrative useful. Today, that doesn't exist. The narrative exists, but there's nothing at the end of the tunnel why people need to build this interoperability for just yet, which is why I would put it like more as that's like pipe dream vanda nalla irukum. But the part that is like more important is just allow you to social signal enough with items that belong to you, right? Like just starting there should be good enough. Like your snap bitmojis of the world, right? Like the items don't do anything useful outside signaling to the rest of the world that you have it. Let's just start there. No? Like in the metaverse, if identity is such an important part, visually adorning stuff on top of you to make you show off is probably one way to start off. It's not the ultimate goal, but the ultimate goal is also seemingly more impossible than this.
That's
got it. Hey, so yeah, that's I just want to like touch upon the environment part you mentioned, right? Which is basically you're saying the amount of GPU power, compute power that will be required to render, to do continuous rendering for metaverses is not possible through a centralized institute. It will need for us to aggregate all of the idle GPU power globally in a decentralized fashion, right? So I just wanted to pick on that and like, why is it not as possible within a centralized unit to do that, right? To kind of aggregate, like say for example, NVIDIA wants to do like aggregation, or like you have cloud that does this for like, through AWS Azure, right? So what is it that prevents it from like going that way, and something like say a render network comes up and like, where all of this aggregation happens? Like just wanted to understand your rationale there.
For sure. So there is something called M2P, or motion to photon. Basica, it says if you're wearing a headset or playing a game, the motion that you do to the photon, the update that you see on screen has to be of a certain time. If that time increases, you feel nauseated, right? Like when you're in virtual reality, you move your head around and that moves like half a second later, that throws your brain off. Because when we were primitive like humans, that sort of delay in your motor functions happens when you're poisoned, right? So the brain automatically now tricks itself, or like thinks that you've either been poisoned or you've eaten something that you shouldn't and you threw up, right? Which is what is called motion sickness, right? Like in our VR sickness more often than not. Now that's like the worst way to onboard someone into virtual reality or like the metaverse, right? Like step one, headset போட்ட வேற லெவலுக்கு motion sickness அவன் வரவே மாட்டான். So you're in trouble. Yes, exactly. So அந்த வார்த்தையை யூஸ் பண்ண வேணாம்னு பார்த்தேன், but the eloquence of Raghu here is like truly in good order. So now you have to prevent the
simplest way of explaining things. That's what this is.
Correct. So அந்த M2P prevent பண்ணும். இப்போ when you, let's say you are playing a game, right? That's streamed to you. And the game server வந்து கொலராடோல இருக்கு, which is very much possible, right? Like கொலராடோ வரைக்கும் நீங்க அனுப்புற டேட்டா போயிட்டு அங்க ஜிபியூல கிரன்ச் ஆகி அதுக்கு வர அவுட்புட் ஃப்ரேம் வந்து திருப்பி இது வரைக்கும் வரணும். ரொம்ப நேரம்லாம் ஆகாது. இட் ஹேப்பன்ஸ் sub 1 second itself, but that itself is like way too much time in order for you to play anything meaningful, which is why Stadia died. Which is like, even to play a decent game experience, not a comparative game experience, a decent game experience cannot be processed in one like big centralized data place and then be sent to you. Right? It simply does not have the M2P needed in order to make it a delightful or a useful experience. So people are like, this is buggy, I will never use this again, close. So in that scenario, you need to do two things. Edge computing அப்படின்னு ஒன்று வரும். The edge computing na cloud வரைக்கும் போய் process பண்ணி வரதுக்கு பதிலா, I will go to the edge, the closest possible source of GPU idle time, process it there, and you offload some of it to the cloud if need be. So basically I have a hybrid model. வேணுங்கச்சே cloud யூஸ் பண்ணிக்கிறேன், இல்லைனா edge. இதுக்கு நடுவில் I will have like low latency 5G. அது வரச்சே பார்த்துக்கலாம், பட் அதுதான் ப்ராமிஸ். So that low latency 5G will effectively let us communicate this M2P to be sub 10 seconds, right? In some tests, which is like insane. We've never seen stuff like that happen in the past. But assuming that 5G lives up to its promise of latency or throughput, you have edge computing that comes up because of that. Now you can have a GPU here, like closer to you, and the cloud as a fallback. That suddenly makes these gaming experiences very much possible. And with a economic model around it that works with tokens, you're suddenly talking about the largest distributed GPU rack that is present in order to power a 3D world around you, which makes a huge difference. And this world will work the way you want it to, not just a tech demo, which you will keep inside ETH Denver that doesn't go anywhere else.
But it also requires like high penetration, right? Because if I'm doing it, say out of Hyderabad, you're doing it out of Bangalore, you will need a lot of this decentralized compute available around you for this to kind of take off. Not take off, but to kind of prevent the same issues that we have from like the Colorado-based server.
Which is where Web3 is incredible, yeah. ஒரு ஐபேடு 2 phone இன்னும் ஒரு லேப்டாப் இருக்கீங்க. So எல்லாத்துலயும் நான் காசு பண்றேன்னு வெச்சுக்கோ. Like I will suddenly flip it on, put it on charge, and just let it do its thing.
Yeah.
Right. Like.
So countering that point, right? Like Filecoin recently announced where they have their node penetration right now. And you can very clearly see that nodes in emerging markets are, on average, are not as useful to them as nodes that come from, say, more developed markets where device quality and processing power and memory is a lot more. So even with Web3, what I'm noticing is that this whole, because see, even before Web3, you could contribute to academic institutions where I can share a portion of my compute and storage for running these academic things. And even for the good feeling, when I did it, what I realized was that it lagged my devices so badly that I had to stop doing it, at least when I was using it, right? You do have a point that the number of non-active devices at any given time that one person owns will definitely increase over time. And then to be able to monetize them is one thing. The other thing is how these distributed compute and storage guys go and penetrate markets and onboard more contributors to their network is something that everyone has historically sucked at. Even the mighty Filecoin struggled with something like India and Southeast Asia. I'm not even going to things like RV, Sia, and Akash and guys like that, who perhaps don't have that rigor that Filecoin has with respect to expansion. So
fully agree. Inge da vande two things I would, again reading tea leaves da, with pragmatism will happen. Number one is the compute problem will be solved at the edge itself and not fully distributed, which is companies like Apple have silicon that's good enough that this problem might be mitigated entirely on one side, right? Adu oru pakkam, where playing a game on your iPhone or your iPad has good graphics. So if that is now put onto your face and that silicon is good enough, maybe we avoid the real-time rendering problem altogether on one side. But what we would still see is rendering as a problem statement that persists, which is, for example, with like, say, your large language models that are there today, or when LLMs combine with 3D modeling or 3D rendering, like let's say your game engines plus LLMs plus say something like a 3D render comes together. Like you want to render a quick movie, you want to render a scene, right? All of these rendering things that you're doing on cloud rendering farms today can now be offloaded to a more distributed system. And if that happens, you can also program it in such a way that your laptop only between like 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. is able to offload like 40% of its GPU power. You basically set rules in order to see what's going on there. And all of this can be done because you want to access the LLM at some point of time yourself. So it's not just about the money making as much as it is about just participating in the network is what gives you access to the large language model that's getting better and better and better over a period of time with the data that it's generating from it, etc. So I think that is the more pragmatic view, where real-time rendering is never going to come to these distributed systems. LLM-based 3D rendering that you need for website images and like static assets over a period of time can start to still take this view per se.
Got it. And this has been fun for me so far.
Brilliant. This is brilliant. Yeah.
I'm just thinking like everyone is comfortable talking about the metaverse as a narrative, but when you start peeling the proverbial onion, all of these conversations.
Yeah, we didn't even get into the stack, etc. as well. I mean, I just want to sit inside Sai's brain for a week, and just ask all this.
Come on, sir. Romba naru venda ippe vaad பண்ணிடுறேன்.
That's only Prashant's intentions. I have no such thing that I want to do. Give me a minute. Someone's at my door. You guys continue.
Yeah. So, the next thing I want to ask, right? So, if we have metaverse, right? To me, mental model of metaverse is like, you have Roblox. Okay, Roblox to me is not a metaverse; it's like a virtual world, right? Then, right, and within that virtual world, it's like a galaxy which has like multiple games, right, or like whatever planets, etc. Now, my kid plays a lot of Roblox, so I got like her to kind of give me a teach-in as well. So, what they do, they kind of like create an avatar, okay, and then they can go across multiple games, play those games. They even have Robux, which is an in-game currency now, right? And this is all proven very attractive to them, and it's very low latency game as well. It's not it's a low fidelity game, right? So it's not like high amount of graphics, etc. Um, so how do we how do we kind of get such users into like a Web3 gaming virtual world who are already so obsessed with something like Roblox or Fortnite or a Minecraft, and that seems to serve their purposes, right? Are we like thinking of even though there is tokenomics, etc., it feels to me that that cannot be like a leading thing. That has to be like a more of a utility that take it or leave it, but the experience is where it has to matter, right? And so I just want to understand, like, how do we bring those users into like a Web3 based metaverse or a virtual world, which all of like even the top ones are struggling today?
Right. So, sir, step part one to that, just from a novice gamer's view, is gaming has inherent half-life, which is gaming is like fast fashion, right? Which is you actually want to try new titles. You intrinsically don't want to sit and play the same game like for like 5 years. Like, given that we would have all been playing Age of Empires only even now, right? So there is a human desire to go try the new thing, right? So that's a great advantage. So switching costs are actually should be way lower because there is desire to try new things. And the second part to this is we've already seen decent outcomes outside the token being associated. For example, think of Beat Saber, which is like this. You would have seen this game often, where you inside virtual reality like play to a tune or a song, and you smash cubes and stuff like that. Beat Saber is a great example of how do you exploit a new medium to offer something that's like meaningfully different, right? Today we're not exploiting these mediums enough to offer something fantastically, right? Which is, you can be the avatar if you are in the metaverse. Sure, but can you give me a little bit more than that in terms of doing something that I couldn't have done via a rectangular view inside my desktop or my laptop or my smartphone that I would truly love here. One such example is Marvel now has a new game for the Oculus, which is Iron Man VR. Right? It actually allows you to be inside the suit, but also do a bunch of things that you could never have done in terms of physics and the way that you play these games, which is very VR first, that you could not ever do inside a smartphone or inside a desktop or a laptop. And now Iron Man has like hit like a couple of $1 million of revenue 20 days into since when they launched. So it's only now that we are exploiting the medium for what it is worth, right? It was very skeuomorphic, which is, hey, what's available in the real world, put it into the metaverse, and we are good to go. Grocery store in the metaverse. எதுக்குப்பா? Like, சாத்துக்குடி வாங்குறதுக்கு எனக்கு மெட்டாவர்ஸ் வேணாம்ப்பா. Like, so that is the problem. So அது எல்லாமே அங்கே தான் சார் ஆரம்பிக்கிறது. So முதல் பார்ட் வந்து exploit the medium better. அதுக்கப்புறம் incentivize the exploitation, which is around tokens. But on the step வரல சார் நம்ம. Like, if you ask me, we're still at the step where making something delightful is often overlooked, and making something token driven is seen as the easier way out instead of creating delight. Like, Among Us in virtual reality exists, like people play it, but Among Us does not have a token model in order for you to make money with your friends as you win more games, etc. Right? Like, that can come later. I'm not saying it shouldn't. I think it very well could. But step one is to figure what delight is. Right? We are doing turn by turn. So here is what happens with Web3 games. Right? We are doing turn by turn based games. We are doing betting based games because you can't have a game on the App Store, which means that you have to use these web controls. You have to make these simple tap games. Even Dookie Dash is like a mini clip game of sorts, right? Like on its best day. So you're inherently constrained by the web, right? In terms of what you can do as solid gaming experiences. But one, how do you prevent that? Two, how do you get to native gaming experiences? Because that's what the user cares. App Store la poi onu download pandren. It looks 10 times better than a Web3 game. Why will I come to the Web3? So step one is, what can I do to create a game that's like just as compelling, if not better, in delight? அங்கேருந்து ஒரு டோக்கன் ஆட் பண்ணா, how do I keep the retention higher? என் கேம் விட்டு 8 மாசத்துல போயிடுறானா, if the churn is 8 months, adding a token to it will probably increase the churn to 25 months, right? But it's never going to solve for the churn between 1 and 8 months, right? Like the first month you can artificially solve it by putting a token because everyone likes free money. But the first month to the 8th month is going to have the drop off, which is like terrible if you're not making anything delightful, 2D, 3D, whatever, right? So on the part is where I think we can index on more.
It's such a good point, but make fun games. If you think about it, Beat Saber is basically Fruit Ninja, okay? Like in terms of
it's a good game, man. It's very addictive.
The way it is done in using the VR experience just makes it feel completely different. So yeah, good points there. And make
a very tangential question there, just like quickly, right? Web versus mobile, right? What do you think of like something like a Solana mobile, like Saga, which is kind of trying to build everything on its own? Do you think that kind of like adds any marginal utility to this entire discussion we are having? I know it's a bit touchy, but I just wanted to put it there.
அப்படிலாம் இல்லை சார், நீங்க வேற. லைக் இப்போதைக்கு இருக்கிற மார்க்கெட்ல எவனோ ஒருத்த ஏதோ பண்ணிட்டு இருக்கான்னு சந்தோஷப்படுறதா இல்ல? ஸோ
wonderful.
More than anything else. So we're at a point where I'm so glad that a company is taking a prescriptive view, saying this is what I think the future would be. This is how I'm going to vertically build out the entire product, not trusting anybody else, right? Like a very Apple-esque approach, curating the quality, the experience, and what needs to come out from it. Beautiful in its own right? Like it takes marbles of generous sizes and steel in order to make that happen. The second part, though, is it's a hard ordeal. Right, you're asking a user to purchase $1,000 phone without any Google Play services or Apple services inside it, and substitute this as their daily driver, right? Which is a tall ask, right? So I believe it's a great, the best outcome for Web3 is to inspire because of the phone, which is show you how incredible user experiences, possibilities, games, and a permissionless world can be like, right? I think the phone should not be viewed as from the number of units sold or the number of people who are walking around New York or San Francisco holding one of these in hand. I think the phone should be used as what Google used. You remember there used to be this line of devices called Nexus. Like I used to love them a lot. They killed it, as much like what Google does with most projects. But the Nexus line of devices was great because they never wanted to sell too many of it. What they wanted to do was use that and apply pressure to the OEMs, apply pressure to developers, and say, don't skin Android. Because back then, skinning Android was a big problem. Like everyone used to skin Android to become like its own thing. Samsung used to have this TouchWiz. LG used to have its own skin. HTC used to have one UI. So Google had to find a way to pressurize people to not skinning Android and showing what amazing Android experiences can be. It never sold any decent number of units, right? But what it did was apply that forward-facing pressure. And that's what I think a mobile strategy for a Web3 company is. Don't expect it to be a profit center or a revenue-generating source in any meaningful manner. What it would be, though, is apply enough soft pressure on OEMs, on the ecosystem to, one, design better experiences, the OEMs to understand this is what the other side of the world is, and three, if this can happen and happen well, maybe the next 1,000 dApps that are designed will all start happening mobile first. The dApps are going to be mobile first in chuma narrative da solindrukome thavara. It's not easy, or we've not seen enough of those happen. And maybe having a dedicated phone to help nudge the ecosystem there is also going to be very useful. So I would view it only as an awesome thing, not from a sales perspective, which is what I think most of the world is measuring it at today. Oh, Saga is going to fail because only 50,000 people placed an order for it. No. I think they're missing the point if we do. Right? Like the point is, this device nudges us to go think in that direction. It's like what the Oculus is. The Oculus is never meant to sell hundreds of thousands of units at the Quest Pro level, which is $1,500. It's meant to show the world and apply pressure on both internal and external teams and the ecosystem on what amazing experiences can be.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, great answer.
Do you feel the same way about the shoes?
Sir, see, building a cultural brand and building a good mobile phone have zero correlation. I believe that more focus right now is more useful for every company. Beyond that, I think
walk to earn.
நல்லா இருக்கு. ரொம்பவே நல்லா இருக்குது.
Anyways, parting thoughts. I think ஒரு மணி நேரம் போனதே தெரியல. It's literally time has flown.
A lot of fun, guys.
That's always the case with you. What would be interesting is also we do a lot of Hindi references when our friends from the north of India also join our podcast. This is probably going to be very interesting to the audience because they'll now have to go back and listen to understand what does Tamil mean, what does Idu Theva means. Maybe we should start this podcast with that Karagata tune to get
straight out. Very apt.
Yeah, but Sai, last parting thoughts, right? What is the world that you would like to be in, where everything goes according to plan for Metaverses, say 2 years from now?
Oh wow! I think a couple of years from now, the Metaverse will be at its Mac Pro and iMac moment, which is you would find every reasonably monetized profession and professional possibly having one for a direct line of impact on their top line or bottom line, right? Which is not everyone. This is not going to be every single consumer just yet. It's the same people who buy a Mac Studio and a Mac Pro will find it very difficult to exist without a headset, purely because it makes them money or saves them money in a meaningful way. And I think companies or Metaverse projects themselves will go from it's cool, it's fun, it's an experiment, it's for the vibes, to how do I make you money or save you money? And a part of which we have like probably not had the time to discuss about is the Metaverse is a generous inclusion of augmented reality as well, right? So a tremendous amount of this goes into what do I superlay or superimpose information onto your real world as much as I take you into a virtual world. And there is going to be in the short run what is called pass-through. So pass-through simply says, I'm going to put cameras on your headset, 12 to 14 cameras, read your environment, and then pipe that into your headset in order for you to annotate the world on top as well. So pass-through experiences will mean that VR and AR become one thing. It's like one unit called mixed reality. There is going to be no VR. It's one spectrum, right? Which will mean one headset does both. And this headset is going to be expensive before it's cheap, and it's going to be really good before it's accessible. And that means that it will go to these prosumers or professionals, and they don't care about delight. They don't care about like the gaming aspect of it for like fun or anything like that. They want to either make more money in their line of work or save more money for their companies. And I think experiences will start intrinsically shifting their focus there. And as they shift their focus there, Web3 becomes a great model to ensure that there is an economic piece to it. But more importantly, like now you're suddenly building use cases, right? You're not building this as a cute part of your larger project, but the project itself is about the metaverse, and it's about a very functional use case that you're paying attention to.
And what type of like a time frame do you assign to something like this?
A very optimistic part of me, and very, very optimistic part of me, is that I've been hearing that this year is like fundamentally important. Like on a couple of areas, I believe if they go fine, 23 for as slow as it is on one side will have like such renewed interest from a hardware perspective on the other side, which in turn generates interest on the software, the experiences, and everything else. That's like super optimistic. I believe there's a good chance of it happening. Worst case scenario, the next 18 months, right? Like I believe that we are one cycle of hardware launches away from like really looking at this long and hard and saying, okay, I think we're getting there. Like we're pretty much there in terms of good devices. Now, what do we build for good devices?
Got it.
Now, sorry, there is one last question which we both Prash and I wanted to talk to you about. Assume that the metaverse happens in the scale at which, it replaces the website. It replaces, or probably we are consuming more of our internet-related activities on metaverse than how we currently do it. What cultural and ethical implications do you think will come out of this? Because I actually legit saw a course being offered by a Western university called Metaverse Ethics. Okay. I was like, Metaverse இதுக்கு என்னடா ethics?
இதெல்லாம் சும்மா நம்மளும் ஒரு கோர்ஸ் சொல்லலாம் சார், கோட் ஆஃப் கான்டக்ட் வித் எக்ஸ்ட்ரா டெரெஸ்ட்ரியல்ஸ். லைக் if we come in contact with people, how do we ensure that we communicate this?
No, but you get the point, right? Like, so assume that this does happen. The world does become, quoting the Zuck, more open and connected in a way in which we haven't thought of, and that leads to a lot of ethical dilemmas that we as humans perhaps don't know how to deal with. What have you thought about it? Do you give too much thought to it as you work in this space so closely?
Right. So AI and the metaverse as a crossroad is going to be where most of these ethical dilemmas start from, by the way. Right? Like just being very dystopian. If I can deepfake anything of anyone and at any point of time and have a high fidelity 3D render of that going around, I can basically do whatever I want, right? Like I can reimagine you as a sea lion and it's like quite funny, right? So, and that can happen through a ChatGPT prompt, right? Like, so that's incredible. And that available to me at a headset level is scary, right? I've done that without your permission on top. So, அந்த மாதிரி நீ பார்க்கறச்சே, synthetic media is going to be one of the largest areas of concern. And I think you will very quickly realize that synthetic media will be scorned as much as the dark web, right? Like we talk about it, but we never encourage access to it types, right? So that's on one side. The second is identity and all that, right? Like I think that would lean in on the opposite direction, which is today we are more scared about our Instagram identity than probably for teenagers, how they are presenting themselves in like a real world environment, right? So I think that will only get worse inside the metaverse, which is your digital identity becomes way more important than your real world one, right? And the last part of this is, if identity becomes that important, there time allocation follows, which is you taking a walk in the park is going to be viewed at as a luxury, which it already is, to be honest. We come back and we're like, I did a 20-minute walk outside. Aren't we supposed to be doing that, right? So I think we will increasingly find that time spent IRL is completely dominated by time spent inside a headset URL, and we'll be okay with it. We will actually be okay replacing our entire desk setup with a headset, a keyboard to the headset. Like our input devices will become like that. So every monitor is slowly going to start being subsumed by one monitor that's in front of you. And as that happens, your time in front of that monitor increases and your time outside that monitor decreases. So ethical concerns which prop up from there, which is media type stuff or engagement type stuff, will like be a lot. But I think the window of what is normal will also shift. Like today, there's two ways to address a concern, right? Like one is to look at it in today's window and say this is like wrong. But the window itself shifting is, I think, what would happen, along with the fact that we will like be treating a lot of this with a fair degree of caution.
Very eloquently put. My last question now is to Prashant. How do you look at all of this, given that you have a kids to raise, and how do you how do you think about it?
I mean, one thing I'm very sure is like delay access to mobile phone for as long as I can. That's I started off at saying 18 years. It's already at 15. So let's see. By the time she's 10, it'll probably come down to 12. So, but the longer I can delay it, the better. And I'm thinking of like neater ways of like coming up with like tokenomics or incentivization programs for kids to do things in real life. And stop spending as much time in virtual life. Very difficult, man. It's if you look at Roblox, for instance, now people are like making games there, and like it's become an economy of its own. Like, and if metaverse, as it becomes more of a reality, it's a commerce center as well, right? Not just a consumption center. and then you can make livelihoods and like establish businesses in there. So you want people to know about it, right? But at the same time, you want them to kind of stay attached to actual reality as well. And it's a very difficult and very distorting feeling as well in terms of how do I enable this overlap.
Well, on that somber note, Sai Krishna.
So it is what it is, man. I mean, we have to take the punches and move along.
No, Sai, thank you so much for coming on this, man. I feel like
honestly, I had way more fun on having a pragmatic, like actual conversation about the metaverse as compared to jargons and sweet nothing. So thank you guys for rooting it. And even though it's a lot about Web3, I'm surprised to include these two in the same sentence in terms of a pragmatic Web3 piece that you guys are running together.
That is our podcast. Our podcast is literally called Web3 Normies. So that is what we are.
The less abstractions we were talking, the better it was. And this was like super enjoyable on that. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sai. Even from my side, I think I learned so much from this conversation. So yeah, thanks for taking the time.
We should all get onto Oculus and play like one game of tennis or something like that. I'll like make that happen.
Done. I have an Oculus. I don't know about Prashant. So
I don't, but I've been told by my daughter already that she needs one. So I'll get one very soon. So the whole dilemma again.